because something is legal doesn't make it moral. Likewise, just because something is illegal doesn't make it immoral. Laws are often gray. That's the topic of this segment. Hi, this is Chris, the amateur ethicist. If you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and ring the bell icon. First, I'd like to establish that I am not a law expert. I may have confused a few of the specifics of what I'm talking about. I look forward to your corrections below. Let's get started. Laws. They aren't always about what's moral. Sometimes it's only about what's legal. In the U.S., we roughly divide laws into two categories, statute and case law. Statutes are passed by legislators. Case law is decided by judges and historic precedent. The longer a law has been entrenched, the harder it is to overturn that law because of its historic precedent. Sometimes laws do change, and sometimes statutes contradict case law. That gray area is where friction can arise, and while it may seem illogical to have more than one way to hammer out laws, it's a fairly healthy way to ensure that laws adapt to meet the needs of those they protect. Beyond the Constitution, there is older English common law from which many of our existing U.S. laws gained their historic precedent. One great example of this is water law. Except, well, it's complicated. Eastern states use what's called riparian rights. Roughly, if you live next to a body of water, you're entitled to use some of that water for reasonable purposes, like watering your garden. However, Western states have something called prior appropriation, where water is viewed more like a mining claim. If you got there first and made first beneficial use of the water, you get to use that water source in perpetuity as you wish, regardless of others' needs or desires. I'm simplifying greatly here, but in general, Western state new landowners can't just start irrigating their garden from a local stream if you already own the water in that stream, even if that stream flows right through the middle of the new landowner's property. In the East, if someone needs water and it's adjacent to their land, common law suggests that under reasonable circumstances, they should be allowed to use it. I live in the Eastern states, so I like riparian rights. That said, parts of the Western U.S. are pretty parched, so it's possible prior appropriation systems may be more appropriate for that situation. Frankly, it horrifies me and comes across more as a first-come, first-served greed. But since I don't live there, I'd be hard-pressed to make a fair assessment. Gross and rough synopsis? The U.S. has mostly two different and opposed legal systems for how water is meted out to its citizens depending solely on where you live. Riparian rights are based on really old common law. Prior appropriation rights are newer. Both are entirely legal, yet drastically different. Without consulting an expert, it's hard to say whether one is better than the other, good or bad. Sometimes federal legal precedent is flouted by states. For example, using cannabis as a recreational drug is a federal crime. However, many states have recently legalized growing, distribution, and use of recreational cannabis, all with heavy taxation and documentation by state governments. It reminds me of what happened with alcohol during Prohibition. For almost 13 years in the U.S., about 100 years ago, it was illegal to make, distribute, or consume alcohol of any kind. Most citizens did all of this illegally anyway, for reasons too involved to discuss here. Prohibition wasn't working. It actually made things worse. So the amendment was repealed, and alcohol became heavily monitored and taxed to reduce the multiple negative effects of mass alcohol consumption on society. While I don't care for cannabis myself, I see its recreational consumption as less dangerous, non-addictive, and just as easy to tax and monitor as alcohol with fewer side effects. It's because of stupid policies and propaganda like the Reefer Madness movie of the 1930s that we don't have robust trade in hemp fiber or cloth, paper, rope, and cheap fiberboard. There are perennial varieties of hemp that could make an easy living for a hemp farmer with available land and a market for fiber products. It's an opportunity we've wasted for almost 100 years that should be reconsidered because of its easy best practices for land use, erosion-resistant cover, and a sustainable return on investment. But it might not be reconsidered because it looks too much like and crossbreeds too easily with the recreational drug-containing varieties of the same plant. Again, this could be monitored. When you view cannabis use from the same perspective as tobacco and alcohol, it's entirely less harmful. So most sentences for crimes dealing with cannabis probably should be expunged and commuted. Many jails could be emptied. It would be just another stupid recreational drug people spend their money on like alcohol and tobacco. At some point, hopefully our federal government will come to its senses, regulate the hell out of cannabis, and gain another tax revenue, just like they did with alcohol and tobacco, because people are going to do it anyway. I'm not holding my breath. These recreational drug laws are more about safety and keeping citizens from harming themselves more than anything. Taxing recreational drugs makes it too expensive for people to do it every day or on the job, because we all know some people would do it recreational drugs every day on the job if they could get away with it and it were cheap. There are a lot of laws out there that are questionable. Blue laws, or laws based on religious belief, are a good example. Making it illegal to work and buy alcohol on Sunday are blue laws. Most blue laws have been repealed, but some counties in some states still have blue laws on the books. Up until a few years ago, in a neighboring county, it was illegal to sell alcohol on Sundays. Some people were going to see this as bad. Others will see it as good. Because it was originally a religious law, it makes sense to repeal it. Why? Let's look at working on Sunday, because there are some religions where working on Saturday or Friday is counter-observant. If you make it illegal to work on Sunday, it comes across as only fair to make it illegal to work on Friday or Saturday too. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? Actually, no, because no one religion is allowed to dominate our laws, and no harm is done to society by people working one day versus another. Most religious laws are seen as removal of liberty. Not everyone observes the same religious beliefs, so we shouldn't all be held to a particular religious standard. The first Europeans to move here came to escape religious persecution. It's why we ostensibly have separation of church and state. Then there are business laws. For example, it's legal for drug companies to charge whatever they like for life-saving drugs in the U.S. There is no oversight in the U.S. for overcharging citizens. Every other modern country in the world has laws against this. High prices force some Americans to go to Mexico or Canada for simple things like insulin or EpiPens. Others do without and die as a consequence of Big Pharma's greed. Drug designers are not charging more because making drugs has become more expensive. They're charging more because it's legal, and drug companies' shareholders are greedy. Next, drug companies can push specific drugs by giving medical doctors a monetary incentive when they prescribe that drug. Doctors end up prescribing the drug more, even if it's massively addictive or not even indicated, because they want the extra cash. That's why some states have huge prescription addiction problems today. We see the problem. We know the answer, yet it's still totally legal. There are a lot of loopholes in various laws that allow businesses and individuals to harm others in a chronic fashion that seems invisible until you start seeing long-term repercussions. Prescription drug addiction is only one example. Another? Styrofoam and plastic one-use disposable containers. They are incredibly convenient. Just toss them in the recycle bin when you're done, right? Actually, it's not that simple. The makers of plastic containers mostly use non-renewable new resources like oil to make those containers. A lot of plastic doesn't get recycled. Most of that plastic gets landfilled using your tax dollars. Because it's legal, and it's cheaper for manufacturers than using recycled plastic. Landfilling plastic ends up being the de facto subsidy for plastic manufacturers because they're not paying for landfill costs, you are. You pay once for the convenience, and then once again when you toss that plastic in the landfill. Then your landfill fees go up when they start looking for new places to dump cheap single-use plastic containers. The remaining plastic that ends up as litter often finds its way to the ocean and ends up on remote beaches or staying in the water permanently and killing wildlife because it looks like food. As a result, now we have several gyres of plastic the size of Texas in the middle of oceans across the globe because of our chronic addiction to the convenience of plastic. It's totally legal to sell plastic and styrofoam. It's totally legal to make plastic only from virgin resources because they're cheaper. And it's so damn convenient. But our continued use of plastics is putting the global environment at risk. We've just scratched the surface of this particular challenge, but suffice it to say, there's a lot about plastic that needs to be better regulated because businesses use a least cost method of operation to accrue the largest possible immediate return on investment, regardless of the chronic societal or environmental consequences. If they can get away with it, they will, because it's legal. Why is using cheaper virgin plastic material still legal? Because it's 10 times cheaper for a big business to send a lobbyist to wine and dine and buy off a few legislators than it is to pass favorable laws to make new plastic items out of recycled content. They see it as a cost of doing business. Long-term consequences be damned. There are a lot of laws that offer heated debate about the correct direction of regulation. The hottest debates in the U.S. right now are about abortion, gun rights, and racism. These are too emotional to dig into here, but when we look closely at these, usually a loud vocal minority who are taking the most radical positions have religious or racist reasons for wanting to force all citizens to accept their positions, regardless of the harm or threat to the liberty of their fellow citizens. Sadly, laws are a form of negative reinforcement. Essentially, we punish people for inappropriate behavior. Modern animal behavior specialists agree that positive reinforcement works better. Essentially, we reward preferred or appropriate behavior. Yet negative reinforcement is how laws in most countries work. Serial speeders get a fine or could lose their license. Serial murderers might face life in prison or execution by the state. The problem is that humans, and in fact all animals, respond better to positive reinforcement. However, I'm unsure how positive reinforcement can be instilled as a legal structure without first severely curtailing freedoms. Surely there must be a balance. If you know of a fair way to create positive reinforcement legal structure, I'd love to hear it. Owning slaves was once legal in this country. It's no longer legal because at some point our citizens found it to be immoral. For over 100 years, this has been the precedent. It's backed by additional human rights legislation and international accords that have addressed the topic since the Civil War. It was once illegal in this country for women to vote, but women can vote today because about 100 years ago, our country's legislators found it to be the only moral choice. Since then, this has been the precedent. Yet we still face challenges and loopholes in our laws that make slavery and voter suppression an unfortunate part of our modern landscape. To recap, laws aren't about what's good or bad. They're mostly about what's legal, what's not legal, and about historic precedent. Here's a maxim about laws. For every one person trying to save the world in one direction, there is someone else trying to save the world in the equal and opposite direction. In cases where there are shades of gray, the question you need to ask yourself is this: is creating a law that satisfies you stemming from either self-righteousness, religious belief, immediate gratification, or the flouting of societal and environmental long-term sustainability? If so, these are probably bad laws. And be honest with yourself, because you and your kids have to live with your consequences. Look closely at the laws in your land. Laws are supposed to protect all the people and the future of those who live under their aegis. Are your laws providing that protection? What would you change about laws where you live? Feel free to comment about this below. This is Chris, the amateur ethicist. I hope you learned something. If you did, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. Thanks for crossing the road with me today, and I hope you'll see me in the next video.